In this video, we'll go over the best monsters in the game who only have a single line of card text. With two little caveats to this: the card must have an effect, and it must only be one sentence long. And also, today's video is brought to you by Skillshare. And at number 10, we have Skellingel. This is a flip effect monster whose only effect is 3 words long, which is to draw one card, and is probably the shortest monster card effect in the game. Although flip effect monsters kind of cheat a little bit when it comes to small card text, because a lot of other cards have to explain the conditions required in order to activate their effects, where flip effect monsters get a pass on that, because this is a special type of card that has rulings that tell you how their effects are supposed to activate, i.e. if this card is just flipped face up. So, since it doesn't need to explain how to activate its effect, they're allowed to have very simple effects like just draw one card. And technically, drawing one card is a good effect. But some of the other cards in this list are slightly better than this, but all of them will have longer card text than this as well. And at number 9, we have Elemental Hero Wildheart, who has the effect where this card is unaffected by trap effects. It's 1 sentence long, only 7 words, and 3 words shorter than Tengabito Shien, who has the same exact effect, just with 3 more words to describe that same effect. Now, Wildheart doesn't have the best effect in the world when it comes to the real TCG, but in YuGiOh Duel Links, this card was part of a somewhat competitive anti-meta deck, where all they do is equip this card with Power of the Guardians, and then just attack and destroy all their opponent's monsters eventually. And the main reason this works is because trap cards are incredibly heavily played in the game. So as long as you just play cards that counter your opponent's spell and monster effects, this card can get over pretty much anything eventually with Power of the Guardians, which is an equip spell card that gains a spell counter every time its monster participates in a battle, and it will give them 500 attack for each spell counter, and it can remove a spell counter to prevent that card from being destroyed. Wildheart never really saw too much success in the same way it did in Duel Links in the normal TCG, so it only gets a low spot on this list, but still makes this list for having an incredibly short card text. That's also good, as there's lots of monsters in the game with short effects that aren't very good at all, but this list isn't about those guys. And at number 8, we have Gaia Drake, the Universal Force. Now, for this list, I kind of ignored materials required for extra deck monsters as part of their card text. Otherwise, no extra deck monsters could possibly make this list. So, what this card does is it cannot be targeted by or destroyed by the effects of effect monsters. And with 3500 attack, it's actually quite difficult to get rid of against the average meta deck, considering most decks get rid of monsters through monster effects. Now, the requirements for this card to be brought out, though, are actually kind of difficult to accomplish, as it requires a level 6 synchro monster, Gaia Knight, the Force of Earth, plus another non-effect synchro monster as its materials. But since this card has no restrictions on its special summon, it is a decent target to be cheated out of the extra deck if you have the ability to cheat out cards from the extra deck, with things like Waking the Dragon or Stein, because 3500 attack is good, and it has pretty decent protection against most monster effects. So you can be confident this card will be able to destroy most of the things your opponent might be able to bring out. It's not the best monster to cheat out of the extra deck with 3500 attack though. That distinction goes to Ultimate Falcon, who's just immune to everything. But Ultimate Falcon has way more card text than this card does, so it doesn't make this list. And at number 7, we have YuGiOh, the Keeper of the Sacred Tree. This card has the effect where it cannot be targeted by card effects except during your main phase 2. Now, if this card existed in Duel Links, where there isn't a main phase 2, it would just be untargetable by card effects all the time, which is a pretty good effect to have on a generic level 10 synchro monster, which is why this card absolutely saw competitive play in the past, and will probably still see competitive play in the future once the new Master Rule revisions go through, and bringing out synchro monsters is made a little bit easier. Because this is one of the few generic level 10 synchro monsters, generic being a synchro monster that doesn't require any special materials for its summon, and it has over 3000 attack. So that extra 100 attack allows this card to beat over some problem cards. So, with being one of the best generic level 10 synchro monsters, while also having an incredibly simple effect, this card easily makes this list. It's just the top 6 spots are a little bit better. And at number 6, we have Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. This card's effect is simply, no monsters can be special summoned except for wind monsters. And this card occasionally sees competitive play because of its ability to lock out special summons, and because the only type it does allow you to special summon, wind monsters, are not very common in top decks. And to add to the fact, this card can easily be special summoned from the deck with the new Simorgh Link monster, Simorgh, Bird of Kings, who can both special summon this card directly from the deck during the end phase, and protect it from targeted effects if it's special summoned to a zone this card points to. As locking your opponent out of special summoning monsters can basically win you the game against most meta decks, as most meta decks revolve around special summoning a lot of monsters during their turn. So a card that can prevent that, and can be easily fetched from the deck, is pretty good. And at number 5, we have Stein. Now, this card technically only has one line of card text, in its newer problem-solving card text version, which adds a semicolon after the cost instead of a period. Its original version had 2 sentences, which said, pay 5,000 life points, period, then had the effect to special summon 1 fusion monster from your fusion deck. But with the new problem-solving card text version, it fits the criteria of this list of only being one line, just kind of a long one. Now, Stein has been banned for most of its history of being a card in the game, because being able to cheat a fusion monster out of your extra deck is pretty good, as there are a couple of really good targets for it, like one of the earlier spots on this list, or even better, Makyura Exterio. And back in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Stein was used to bring out Blue Eye's Ultimate Dragon, and then equip it with Megamorph to attack for over 8,000 points of damage, as you would have less life points than your opponent thanks to paying 5,000 of them with Stein's effect, which would activate the effect of Megamorph to double the attack of the monster it's equipped to. Nowadays though, Stein occasionally sees competitive play here and there, lastly seen in an Orcus deck which brought out an Exterio with it, and is currently limited to 1 copy per deck. Even if its effect isn't as broken as it once was, it's still very powerful to cheat cards out of the extra deck, especially on an effect that's not once per turn, even if the cost for using it is pretty high at 5,000 life points. And at number 4, we have Morphing Jar, another flip effect monster which only has the effect to discard both players' hands, then make both players draw 5 cards. Now, being able to draw 5 cards, no matter how many cards you discarded from your hand with this effect, is super good. If it was easier to use Morphing Jar's effect in the average meta deck, or if it was unlimited, it would probably see play in every single deck, because this card allows you to go a potential +5 in card advantage, with the downside of potentially giving your opponent a +5 in card advantage as well. But basically, just because this is a flip effect monster who also benefits your opponent, it's a little bit too slow to be played in normal decks that are very combo heavy, and also not something you'd want to use to give your opponent more cards as well, unless you're playing a Dark World deck, some kind of stall deck, or even an Empty Jar deck, based around Morphing Jar that revolves around giving it to your opponent so that you can flip it up and down over and over to deck out your opponent. Although Empty Jar decks haven't really seen play since 2012, that's more of a niche gimmicky strategy than it is a competitive one, but Morphing Jar still does have a very powerful effect nonetheless. And at number 3, we have Destiny Hero Malicious. This card simply has the effect where it can banish itself from your graveyard in order to special summon another copy of itself from your deck. And part of the reason this card has a seemingly longer card text than some of the others is because a lot of the parts of its effects just kind of have big words, including listing its own name in its effect. But for a card with a very simple one-line card text, this is an incredibly good graveyard effect that allows hero decks to go +2 in card advantage if they're able to get a single Malicious in the graveyard, which is incredibly easy in hero decks, as they have tons of ways to search this card out or send it directly from the deck to the graveyard, especially with the very good fusion spell card, Fusion Destiny, which allows you to fusion summon a Destiny Hero fusion monster using materials from your deck, and 2 of the more heavily played Destiny Hero fusion monsters can use Destiny Hero Malicious as one of their materials. Or even in hero decks that don't use Fusion Destiny, Malicious is still a good card because it can be searched out through Stratos, Shadow Mist, or Vision Hero Vion, 3 cards that basically all hero decks play. Currently, Destiny Hero Malicious is not on the ban list, despite the fact that it allows you to go +2 in card advantage with its effect, assuming you're able to make use of the 2 monsters it brings out from the deck, of course. And because of its really good graveyard effect, it routinely goes on and off the ban list at semi-limited, and it just happens to be off the ban list right now, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it back on the semi-limited list in the future, and only the semi-limited list, because if they limit this card to 1, then its effect is literally useless, kind of like what they did with Zodiac Rat Pier. And at number 2, we have Gren Maju eiza. This card's effect is simply that its attack and defense are equal to the number of your banished cards times 400. Now, Gren Maju is the center stone of the Gren Maju deck, which currently sees lots of competitive success as a rogue deck, because getting this card to over 10,000 attack is pretty easy, and can be done while gaining a whole bunch of advantage. You see, there are currently 4 cards in the metagame that are good enough to see play in other decks, which also allow you to banish a whole bunch of cards from your deck. And those are Pot of Desires, Orochi, the Serpentron Sky Slasher, Eater of Millions, and Pot of Extravagance. Each of these cards require you to banish cards in your deck or extra deck face down in order to use their effects or bring them out, with some of them allowing you to banish over 10 cards of their effects, which will give Gren Maju an additional 4,000 attack. And they do all this while gaining advantage or while gaining a very powerful monster. Gren Maju decks also have access to Golden Castle Stromberg, which allows you to banish 10 cards from your deck at the start of your standby phase in order to keep it on the field, which allows you to special summon monsters from your deck and protects you from battle damage. And since a lot of monsters played in Gren Maju decks have great removal effects, and a lot of them are also level 8, which allows you into the great rank 8 Exceeds monsters, you're able to pick apart whatever board your opponent might bring out, while banishing a whole bunch of cards, and then dropping down a 10,000 attack beatstick in the form of Gren Maju, to just attack over anything your opponent might have out left in order to win the game. And surprisingly, having a gigantic, easily summoned beatstick is really good in the current meta, especially in decks that gains a whole bunch of advantage while buffing this card's attack up. And this one was kind of a sleeper hit. Gren Maju has been in the game for a long time and never really saw too much competitive success. It's just a whole bunch of cards were released within the past couple of years that had downsides of banishing a whole bunch of cards to use their good effects, which just happened to work really good with this old card, which also just happens to have a single line of card text. And at number 1, we have Makyura, the Destructor, probably one of the most broken cards ever made in the game. This card has the effect where, simply, during the turn it's sent to the graveyard, you can activate trap cards from your hand. Now, trap cards are balanced around the fact that they cannot be activated the turn they're set. So a lot of trap cards have pretty powerful effects that don't see play because you have to wait a turn before you can use those effects, which makes them vulnerable to all kinds of spell or trap card removal and gives your opponent a chance to counterplay and try to do their own thing. And a lot of trap cards are also made under the assumption that you can't activate them from the hand, because that turns every trap card into a spell speed 2 use whenever you want effect, which breaks all kinds of rules, like allowing you to use Call of the Haunted with Dark Scorpion Chick the Yellow in order to attack for an infinite amount of battle damage. And since Makyura the Destructor's effect can be activated no matter how it's sent to the graveyard, you could just mill this card directly from your deck to the graveyard in order to gain its game-changing effect, which would definitely open up all kinds of FTK decks if it was ever made available for some reason. There are so many ways you can win on your first turn due to the effect of Makyura that they literally could not unban this card unless they changed its effect, or banned like half the trap cards in the game, because its effect is just that powerful, and would definitely be the number 1 card on a list of cards which could never be unbanned, which I think I probably made a video about that or something, and it just happens to only have 1 line of card text. Even if it is a medium-length sentence, it does fit the criteria for this video, and it's definitely the strongest of all of the monsters who only have a single line of card text, being one of the most game-breaking cards in the game. Alright, and that's the end of the video. A video like this only works with monsters because tons of spells and traps only have a single line of card text, and it's much rarer for monsters to only have a single line. So if you have any ideas for future videos similar to this one, or know of any other monsters with a single line of card text that should have made this list, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. Now, with it being the new year, maybe you have New Year's resolutions for doing something you've always wanted to. Maybe get into making Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube videos? Then Skillshare is the best place to start. You see, there's lots of tutorial videos on YouTube about how to do YouTube, generally from channels that have, less than a stellar amount of subscribers giving so-so advice. I've seen tons of up-and-coming Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTubers, and I can definitely tell you they could use the advice from these Skillshare videos. Really good advice too, like, how to properly edit your videos, remove background noise, how to market yourself, how to make good thumbnails. I see so many people who start out new channels and they obviously just have no idea what they're doing, when the information is readily out there, in a vested, tested site like Skillshare. You get a 2-month free trial if you sign up with my link, watch all of their videos. It will really improve if you want to make Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube videos. So make 2020 the year you finally start your YouTube channel and get lost in creativity with Skillshare's online classes.